So today I want to talk about pessimism versus optimism, and something that Seth Godin wrote in his book called The Dip. And the reason I want to talk about it is we've got a lot of movement happening in the company right now. There's a lot of people moving from one position to the next. Darian's headed to China, so we're trying something new. We're looking at something very, very significant in terms of opening up a branch in Asia. We're really trying some crazy stuff at the moment. I want to basically talk about this idea of the dip, or as I like to call it, the chasm. So I'll use myself as an example, but this is universal. So when you start off on a new project, you start off and you have something called uninformed optimism, okay? You don't know what's going to be hard about the thing that you're starting. Sasha, to use you as an example, at this point, you don't know what's going to be difficult about this job, but you're optimistic because it's a new thing and you're trying something out and it's fun and everything. Same thing for us, right? Darian, we're headed to China, right? We're optimistic about it, but we don't know what's going to go wrong in this project. We have no idea what's going to go wrong. And so we've got optimism, but we are woefully uninformed. We have no idea what's going on, but the excitement is there. The next spot, so now you actually start working on this thing. When we started out, uninformed optimism, right? Everything was going super well and we were making money and things were awesome and we were billing the clients and things were going great, but we were uninformed. And then things started going wrong. Overnight, we were struggling with cash flow. Overnight, we're struggling with a whole bunch of different stuff. And then we reach this point over here, which we can then call informed pessimism. Why is that? Well, because now you figured out all the stuff that sucks about the thing that you're doing. And that's where most people give up. 90% of people give up at this point. And then they'll go back to uninformed optimism and they'll try something new. And I want to ask a question here. How long do you guys think it takes to go from uninformed optimism to informed pessimism? What would you say the average lead time is?
It can happen in a day even, but
let's say 3 months.
And the average.
I think it's quicker. I think it's like it can happen so quickly within a day.
Yeah.
That's what I'd say is a couple of hours.
A couple of hours if you get some research and all of a sudden you get a scary
100%.
list of things that you need to do.
I think it's very contextual. It's very dependent on the content for sure.
Depends on the size of the project, I think. But we'll get to that because that's actually the part that I want to talk about today. So you can find this online. Alex Hormozi has a talk about this that's brilliant. He's got a really good talk about this. Seth Godin describes it really, really well too. So you guys can go watch them. They go into a lot of detail on all of the emotions and the feelings and all of that stuff. But I want to add a new element to this today. Okay, so you go from uninformed optimism to informed pessimism. And then you reach what's called, Seth Godin calls it the dip. I call it the chasm. When things are sort of up and down, and it's not really great. You're not really seeing progress. You're figuring out a whole bunch of nitty-gritties. It doesn't feel like you're getting anywhere. And in the chasm, or in the dip, that's where times are the hardest. That's where no one sees you struggle. That's where you're working, but you're not getting any recognition for the work that you're doing. That's where you're spending a lot of time introspecting. And when you get to the end of the chasm, you reach a new plateau, and we can call this plateau informed optimism. Okay, now you've gone through it. You've worked on all of the nitty-gritties. You've figured out how to solve the problems. And you've built systems to deal with those things. And now you are optimistic again because all of a sudden things are working. You're winning. People think you're a genius. It's like, how did you know to do that? You guys have heard that, right? In your own craft, in what you do specifically. Certainly, I mean, Jono, you've been designing for what, 11 years?
9.
9. Okay, 9 years. When you started out as a designer, you had uninformed optimism. And you probably very quickly realized that it's not as easy as it looks. And you hit informed pessimism. And you slogged through the chasm. At which point did you hit informed optimism?
So I'd say my first attempt at freelancing. actually managing myself.
And did you feel optimistic about design or about business or?
Yeah, I think I was always optimistic about design. It was more so I was overzealous. I underestimated the amount of mental fortitude that would take to actually carry that out, as opposed to just workload is one thing, but just the actual just mental fortitude of being able to carry yourself through a day, irrespective.
So that mental fortitude period, that's exactly what I'm talking about. That's the chasm.
Yeah.
Elon Musk says starting a business is like staring into the abyss while you're chewing glass. I can confirm. I can confirm. There's definitely a period of time that feels like that. There's another saying, you guys have probably all heard me say this at some point. And this is actually from the guy who started AfriHost. And he says, it took me 10 years to become an overnight success. It took me 10 years to become an overnight success. I love that because that's how I feel about the previous business that I started. We gave up somewhere just before we hit Informed Optimism and the business was gonna take off. And the thing collapsed in the chasm. And it sucked because we worked really hard to build that company. And now in Xponent is now 8 years old. I feel like if I can put Xponent's development on a timeline, I'd say Uninformed Optimism to Informed Pessimism was probably around 2 years. 2 years in, I felt, yes, this is maybe not the right business for me. Maybe I should try something else. Maybe I should go into engineering, or maybe I should go into product design or something like that. And I was interested in doing a whole bunch of stuff. And it was difficult because that was around the time COVID hit as well. So the chasm was specifically difficult. But we pushed through the chasm, and now I feel like we're reaching a place. Like in the last year, I feel we now have informed optimism. The reason why it feels like that to me is because things are falling into place, right? We've got a strong design team. We've got a strong marketing team. The technology team is doing well. Our coding work is starting to flow easily. The marketing team's running stuff without me even knowing what's going on sometimes, and they're just doing it, and it's working. The accounts team fell into place. That was a massive part of figuring out how to make this business work. So that was at the beginning of this year. But I'd say about somewhere in last year, after the stuff sort of settled, that's when I felt, okay, things are starting to work now. Things are starting to come together. So you could say the chasm for Xponent was around 5 years. 5 years of chewing glass and staring into the abyss. And it really depends on the size of the product or the project that you want to take on. That's why Gerard and I have the private joke about selling dirt. Because if you pick a simpler product, the chasm is much smaller. You'll figure out what sucks about delivering dirt to people. But it's not going to be a lot.
Very quickly.
Very quickly. You're going to figure out what sucks about it. You're going to figure out systems. And then you're just going to truck on. To get back to the part that's unique that I want to add today, the flavor that I want to add to this whole conversation is, how do we use optimism and pessimism to our advantage? How do we hack this process? Because it's hackable. You can actually hack this process. The first thing, this might be a little bit of a cheat, I think, is the right way to think about it, but there might be a cheat here. But the first thing to do is to not get into the chasm in the first place. So all I want to do is I want to swap around these two by saying, before you start a project, you should apply the maximum amount of pessimism that you possibly can in the form of a thought exercise. If I had been more pessimistic at the beginning of that project, I probably would have either not done it, or I would have probably vetted it a lot better. I did try, but I was obviously too excited and my optimism got the better of me. So I'm not saying you should be pessimistic about everything. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying you should use pessimism like a tool in a toolbox. You take it out, you apply that lens to the situation, and when you're done, you remove it. And by doing that, you can go and road test these ideas and try and poke holes into everything and see what's going on. before you go into the situation. There's an example, and I always ask this question. It's sort of like this example never really lands nicely, but when is the best time to quit running a marathon?
Before you start.
Yeah, at the beginning.
Yeah, I'd say before you even start training. Because here's the thing, if you're going to run a marathon, the marathon isn't the part that's really the hard work, right? The hard work is the 3 months before that or the 6 months before that, when you're buying shoes, you're waking up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go for a run, you're sneaking in a run at lunchtime, you're running the hard miles, you're hurting your knees, you've got to buy different shoes, you're neglecting your family because you're spending a lot of time on the road just getting miles under your belt. So all of that build-up, that's where the resources are being expended. And then you go and you start the marathon on the day. You've done a 22 now, you've done a couple of 22s on Sundays. You missed Sunday lunch with your family because you ran a 22 and you were moch when you got home, so you just fell asleep on the couch. So you've paid all of the price, or 90% of the price. Now you're getting to the day of the race and you give up on 32 kilometers. Or 36 kilometers. I think that's what they call the death valley, right? It's 36 kilometers. That's when most people quit. And you just don't make it to the 42 mark. So you've put in 95% of the work, but you still don't get a medal. Do you see the problem here? Where if you were very pessimistic in the beginning and you said, you know what, I don't think I'm going to be able to run this. You didn't buy the shoes, you didn't waste time with your family, you didn't do all of those things. And so we need to use our pessimism very strategically. Please, you need to understand what I'm saying. I'm not saying you should be pessimistic to the point where you don't do anything, because then nothing will get done. I'm saying your energy is precious. And if you can save that energy and throw all of it behind one thing that you've really road tested and figured out and played devil's advocate and all of that, and you throw your energy behind that one thing, then you can push through the chasm with a dedication and with focus, and you get to the point of informed optimism. Because what ends up happening with most people, I see this on a daily basis, they take on a project, they start working on it, they get to the pessimism part, and then they're like, oh, this sucks. Let me go try something else. And they go back to uninformed optimism, and they try something new, and off they go. They figure out what sucks about it, and then they're like, oh no, this isn't for me, and then they go back. And those people stay poor for the rest of their lives. I've seen it. I know people like this. I know a chap, I'm not going to name names now, but he started a dog food business. And he was going to sell raw dog food. So he started doing it and everything, and his dogs loved the food, and I bought a couple from him, a couple of bags. My dogs loved it, so he started doing well, everything. And then it started getting hard because he needed to figure out packaging, and he needed to put capital down, and he needed to do a whole bunch of stuff. And he was like, no, I'm just going to make dog food for myself. It's not even that worth it. And so he started a new thing. Then he got really interested in cannabis production. So he started getting really involved in the cannabis scene. And he started, going to grow houses and going to things. And he bought a little grow room, and then he started working on that. But then he figured out what sucked about that business. And he went back to the next thing, and I think at that point he was interested in honeybush tea. And then he was going to buy honeybush tea and ferment it at home, and it was going to be the next big thing, and and he kept going. And I don't know which business he's in now, but I'm betting, I'm 95% certain that he's had 7 or 8 iterations of this, spinning in one place, not making any progress, because the moment things get hard, he was like, this isn't for me, I'm going to go look for the next thing. You guys know my dad preaches, right? Not really a qualified priest or pastor or anything, but he does preach on Tuesdays for the Sakamana, right? Prayer meeting for business people. And he always makes the point. He says, there's no such thing as passive income. There's no such thing as a business that runs without you. From the sweat of your brow will you earn your bread, right? It's a biblical concept. Now, you don't have to believe in the Bible to understand that there is no such thing as passive income. You can go look. Even stock investment is probably the closest thing you can get to passive income, because you don't have to do anything, but you still have to monitor it. You still have to go and choose where you're going to buy your stocks. You still have to make sure that platform's not going to close down. I mean, get rug pulled. I mean, that happens all the time.
And you still have to actually earn the money to invest. So,
Exactly. So
yeah.
yeah, it's there's no such thing as real passive income. I mean, maybe, but it's like a moment in time. It doesn't exist all the time.
A
It's
rare
always
goose.
going to be maintenance. Yes, exactly. I'm a huge fan of the 4-hour work week, but even Tim Ferriss in the book 4-Hour Work Week says, the point of this book is not for you to work 4 hours a week. The point is for you to become more effective so that when you do, you're achieving a week's work in 4 hours, and then you can spend the next 4 hours doing something else and working on something else. There are ways to do it. I think the Pareto principle can be applied. So the 80-20 rule, if you guys know it. So in other words, you can get 80% of the results from 20% of the work. I'm a huge fan of that. I'm not saying that you shouldn't take shortcuts and look for advantages. I'm specifically very keen on finding the ways to benefit and to cheat and to shortcut, because life is difficult. The chasm is huge. The chasm is massive. And if you're not looking for shortcuts, you're probably not doing it right. You need to punk the system, because the system's out there and it will punk you back. And it's going to look for ways to make your life hard. I'm saying like the system is some conscious being, but you guys know what I'm talking about. Sometimes it just feels like everything's against you. And that's why we need to apply our minds to this. So anyway, what I'm getting at about pessimism and optimism is, if you apply pessimism at the beginning of the project, you can make the chasm a little bit smaller, because you figured out what sucks about it before you get to informed pessimism. And here you can then have not as much pessimism. And you'd be surprised when you've got that little bit of extra fuel in your tank, the chasm seems a little bit easier to get through. The chasm or the dip becomes a lot easier to handle on a daily basis. And then you get to the point of informed optimism, and here you can actually start benefiting. And this is when other people look at you, the churners, right? The people that just live in this space. They're going to look at you and say, wow, look at how well this person's doing what they're doing. Look at how easy it is for them. But they don't know all the work you put in. They don't know all the little niggles that you figured out. So they're looking at you saying, wow, I want to be that person. Let me go and start doing what they're doing. Look at the crypto scene. Right? A lot of people got into crypto. It's this same thing, right? The crypto scene. People got involved, uninformed optimism. Some of them are just plain uninformed. They bought pizza with like 10 Bitcoin and whatever the case may be, or even 100 Bitcoin or whatever the case may be. And they didn't know what was going on. Everyone was optimistic about it. And then everyone started investing in it and everything. And then all of the rug pulls happened and FTX closed down. And there were massive cases. And now crypto is actually still in this chasm space. People are still invested in it. A lot of people sold. So the people that sold early, they're back here. I'm one of them, I'll freely admit. Sold early, went back here, started something else, didn't get involved in crypto again, or went in for a different coin, figured out what sucked about it and went back. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. And a lot of those people went into the chasm thinking, oh, I'm going to make so much money, it's just going to be easy and whatever the case may be. And we know people that like that. I know a lot of them personally. And a lot of them lost everything. They got wiped out with FTX. And they never got to the informed optimism thing. But here's the thing. The people that stuck through it, they're doing super well now. Because they hodled, right? They kept their coins, they kept mining, figuring out all the little nonsense things in between and protecting themselves against rug pulls and protecting themselves and getting their coins off exchanges. You know, getting cold wallets, getting cold storage. These are stupid examples. Just think about it. I mean, how many people do you think churned here on crypto? The vast majority, right? 95% of them, maybe more. The few that stuck through it, I think they call them diamond hands, right? Not paper hands, diamond hands.
Yeah.
The ones who stuck through it, they're now sort of sitting pretty and they're doing well. And everyone's like, wow, look at how well this person's doing. They're doing so well, but they don't realize how many times that person had an itchy finger wanting to sell, how many times they had to build the mental fortitude, how many times they looked at protecting their assets instead of selling. Can anyone give me an example in your own life where you went through the cycle, either where you gave up on something that you think you should have stuck with and you went back to uninformed optimism and tried something else, or some example where you actually went through the chasm and now you're on the other side of it?
before my previous job, I was practicing and studying video editing and DaVinci Resolve, but that job came along, and that job turned to be a rug pull in and of itself. So
The job.
Yeah, the job.
What job was it?
My previous position, I was working with 3D point clouds and technology called structure from motion. So basically photogrammetry.
Okay. So like rendering, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. And which part was the informed pessimism that made you go and change your mind?
Well, I mean, I took the job because it was a job, and it was an exciting one at first. But once I got like 6 months in and realized what was going on, that was the point. I was like, okay, this is a bit of pessimism now.
And then you went and tried something else.
Yeah, which is Xponent.
Okay, you've been with Xponent for a while now. You're starting to figure out what sucks about this.
Yeah.
And there's going to be stuff that sucks, guys. You don't have to pretend. I know. I built it. I probably had the most suck that I had to deal with in this company. So I know there's stuff that sucks about being in our industry, working in this company, but we've figured out a lot of it, and we're making it better on a daily basis. And that's this chasm. And so each of us are on our own journeys with Xponent. For me, things are starting to flow and work and feeling good and feeling like we've actually achieved something. Yes, John?
I can give a very swift example of pessimism applied too soon. The job to do a comedian's website. I knew of the comedian. I was like, oh, this idiot. I can't believe we're going to do work for this guy. And I started literally, unbeknownst to me, I started giving this comedian, I started leveraging my opinion about this comedian, unbeknownst to me that Cameron was good friends with the dude. And then we ended up losing the project. So uninformed pessimism can also be a bad thing, which isn't on the chart here. Uninformed pessimism is the downfall.
So that's when you're pretending you're here, but actually you're still here.
Yeah.
Okay. Yes, Ruan.
I also got an example. There was a time when I almost left. Well, that was Baydra then, before it was Xponent. Yeah, I kind of slugged through the chasm there, finding my feet of what I wanted to do. And then, well, the SEO and website maintenance stuff kind of just stuck. So yeah, that's my journey through the chasm. And now I feel like I'm actually finally starting to climb the informed optimism. You know, finding my feet and
That's awesome.
finding what I want to do in life and in the company. So yeah, that's my journey, definitely.
Ruan, do you remember when we used to meet on my stoop in Brooklyn to stick labels?
Yes, for the hot sauces. I remember that. That was like a few hundred bottles just sitting there sticking on the
A
label.
few thousand. Ruan, remember I had the crew coming in on weekends, my workers from the other company.
Oh yes.
Coming in on weekends to stick more. I think we did over 2,000 bottles that one year.
The afternoon until the evening, and then we had some brandy, and that was a fun job. A lot of work.
Yeah.
Fun work.
I would say that was when I hit informed pessimism.
Like, you're like, listen, this sucks. Wow.
This really sucks. Okay. Does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really,
Yeah.
very,
I hope you can take something away from this, not only in your professional life, but in your personal life as well. And obviously, there's different ways to look at this. I always say these are just perspectives. They're perspectives. I'm not saying this is the only rule that counts. This is the only way to look at the world. Not at all. This is one lens or one view that we can use to look at the world. And you can apply it in different ways. You can apply it in a micro setting. You can apply it in a macro setting. You can apply it over the course of your life. When you get to a point where you're like, I'm out, I don't want to do this anymore. Ask yourself, are you just hitting the chasm now and you don't know how to get through it? Or are you really not keen? And if you're really not keen anymore, then go back and do uninformed optimism on a new idea. But when you get there, remember, you're going to figure out what sucks about it. That's what I mean about applying pessimism early on, to skip the part where you're like, oh, screw this, I'm out, I don't want to do this anymore. That's the point of applying pessimism early. It's not to stop you from doing things. It's to attenuate your mind so that you know you're going to become pessimistic about this. So it's kind of like inoculating yourself, like getting a vaccine against the informed optimism that you're going to have later. And when you get to informed pessimism, then you should go back and say, why was I optimistic in the first place? And it's that energy that's going to drive you through this space. I want to make one point. That's the next part about when you should apply. Just like you've got pessimism as a tool in your tool belt, you can also have optimism as a tool in your tool belt. When you start seeing these things as tools, in other words, your emotions are tools to apply, then you've got superpowers. Because when you hit that point where frustration and doubt and all of that starts feeding into it, then you can tell yourself, wait a second, I remember this. Let me take my optimism tool out and apply that to the situation and look for what's good about it. And that's going to help you apply the energy to figure out how to overcome problems. Stuart?
I just wanted to say, it's also when you're in that chasm over there, it's difficult sometimes to know where you're at. I take an example of my old company. I left quite abruptly there after a year's worth of pessimism. So and I should have left a year earlier. Looking at it now in my own personal life, my own career, it would have done better for us. I wanted to get to the other side and reap the rewards where, it would have been better for me to leave earlier. I'm a lot happier now, especially at Xponent. You get caught up in your own mind's eye sometimes where you think it's going to get better. It doesn't always get better. Even if you push through, it can be as bad. You can go back to uninformed optimism again. So yeah, that's also a reality here.
Yeah, Stuart, that's what I'm saying, is this isn't some panacea that's just going to solve all the problems. I'm definitely not saying that. But I agree with you. I was in a very similar situation as you, by the way, with my previous company.
Yeah.
And it just didn't get better. I worked harder and it just never got better. Then I realized it's not because of the idea, it's because of the people. And I don't know if your situation was the same. I don't know the details of your situation. But I realized no matter how good I make this, no matter how many problems I solve, no matter how much figuring out I do, I'm always going to be in the chasm because I've got people in the team that are basically pulling me down all the time. And they're basically pulling me back towards this space all the time. No matter how much energy I put in, no matter how much work I put in, it just keeps getting worse. And that's when I decided, okay, no, I'm quitting. At that point, I'd actually made an offer to the other guys in the company. And I said to them, why don't I just buy you out? And then you guys can go on your merry way and I'll run this company. I'll pay you. Just go and I'll figure it out. And they refused. They absolutely refused. They just said, no, you're not going to do this without us. And that's when the penny dropped for me. And I realized, okay, these people are going to drag me down. That's the point, is they want to punish me. They want to see me fail. And that's when I decided to quit. And I did it dramatically. I got on a plane and flew to Mauritius. Didn't tell anyone.
Love it. Great way to go out. Yeah, I think it was very similar in that aspect for me as well. It's just like one day the penny drops, and you're like, it's never going to change. Like there's only so much you can do. It's not going to change, or at least it's not going to change anytime soon. And it's like a personal decision of it might never work out, and you've wasted, the next 5 years of your life, or call it now and jump ship.
Yeah, so that's what I meant by applying that pessimism early on in the project.
I agree with that.
So if I had applied a bit more pessimism before I started that project, my life would be very different today.
Yeah.
And that's what I mean, is strategically using pessimism like a tool that you use in a tool belt, and you can take it out and use it when you need it. Instead of having it be an emotional response that rules you, you can use the emotions to rule the situation. I've got this silly thing that I said to someone once, and it was very confusing, but I still love this expression. I said, never let your emotions decide how you feel about things. It's cheeky, right? Never let your emotions decide how you feel about things, which is silly because your emotions are how you feel about things. But if you think about it a bit, there's a lot of truth in that. Yeah. Yes, Sasha.
I'm very similar to a previous colleague where I knew at a certain time in my life, things are not getting at a certain company. And I knew I had to leave, but because of my loyalty, I stayed, and it sort of backfired in my face. So ever since, I start off with being very, very pessimistic. So that's, maybe a lesson for me, because I started at that company very optimistic. And 7.5 years later, I struggled to get out of the pessimism. Every time, you try to start something new, you think about everything that could go wrong based on previous learning experiences.
Yeah, exactly. And so, but that's what I'm saying is you need to, and I'm not saying I manage to do this all the time, but pessimism and optimism shouldn't be emotional responses that you are beholden to, that you succumb to. They should rather be tools that you apply selectively. So it's like, okay, I'm beginning a new project. Let me apply some optimism to it. Cool. What can go right with this? And then apply some pessimism. What can go wrong with this? And using that as an exercise actually teaches you to use your emotions strategically, as opposed to letting your emotions use you. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Cool. Hayden, how about you?
Yeah, one, it makes sense. And two, just to go back to the Bitcoin pizza story, that guy spent 10,000 Bitcoin on that pizza, and this morning that's worth $110 million or billion. Sorry.
Sure.
I just want to say something there. Nah, is the guy didn't make a mistake, because a lot of people said the guy lost a lot of money, but at that stage, that's what it was worth. So you could have, for example, he could have paid, say it was $10 for the pizza now. He could have actually gone and paid the $10, but instead of buying the pizza, he could have bought $10 worth of Bitcoin. So every single person in the world who didn't buy Bitcoin with that $10 and bought the pizza made a mistake. It wasn't just them, if you guys understand what I mean.
Yeah.
Yes.
So
it was just the currency. It's the value at the time is the value at the time. Yes. Yeah.
So before I give the mic to Jono, I'd like to address this kind of. So yes, absolutely. I'm not talking about the value of the Bitcoin. I'm talking about that individual state of mind today.
Oh yeah, it might. Yes, still.
Think about how
you can think of all the Bitcoins you've spent or not bought, or yes, yeah.
and that feeling. I'm talking about the emotion.
Yes.
That person's mindset is, oh, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done this, if only I'd done this. And that emotion might drive them towards going and trying something else.
Yes, no, definitely.
So it's the emotion I'm talking about, not the value of the Bitcoin per se.
Yeah.
I'm talking about the pursuit of being a crypto investor in general.
Because it's also how you perceive it at that stage. Yes, the emotion. Yeah, okay. Cool.
Jono, how about you?
I'm going to approach this first with like an analogy and then say how I kind of apply it. In America, there's this like a justice movement that tries to free prisoners that have been wrongfully convicted. And they did this whole statistical analysis on, or tried to figure out why these people get wrongfully convicted. And one of the biggest deciding factors for those convictions was whether or not that person stood before a judge before or after lunchtime. And generally, the highest rate of wrongful conviction is within the last 2 hours before a judge took lunch. So simply for the sake of the fact that a judge was hangry, they were more likely to wrongfully convict somebody.
Or to apply harsher sentences.
Sentences. Anyways, I might have butchered the example, but what I'm trying to say here is like the only way you can truly overcome uninformed pessimism, informed pessimism, and uninformed optimism, because ideally you'd like to be at informed optimism, in my opinion, is a holistic approach. I can't even understate this, because this is now my lived experience, is like, if you don't get good sleep, if you don't have a good diet, if you aren't emotionally right with yourself, let's say you're having an issue with a family, the loss of a loved one, like all of these things definitely influence your informed pessimism. And then on some days you need compassion and forgiveness for yourself. It's almost always, for me, the only way out is through, and the only way through is just this holistic approach. There's no one single thing. You can't get to work from 8 to 5 p.m. and then just be that, And for me, that's just like, if you look at the top performing companies in the world, like if you look at Google, for example, they create holistic environments that allow people to kind of, and Badge, you've said this yourself before, you'd love to have the team have access to like a therapist or cleaning services because it's a holistic thing, like I pulled in my survey last night, and can I just read the one answer I gave you? Because I really did think about this. My answer is, I love working at Xponent because I've come to find a home and a team and all who work towards a shared goal of financial liberation and personal freedom. And truly, like, that is, at the end of the day, it's a holistic approach in my experience.
Jono, I'll just add to that by saying you're spot on, in my opinion, on being right with yourself. And that's what I'm talking about. If you're not right with yourself, like you're not sleeping, whatever the case may be, all of those things, then your emotions rule you, as opposed to you using your emotions as tools in a toolbox.
100%.
And so I believe it's that, I mean, just like the example of the judge not being able to control their emotions. We all think we're above that, but we're not. We're all just animals, and our baser instincts will overcome us unless we hold ourselves to a higher standard. And so there's some things money can't buy. A healthy body and a peaceful home. You can be as rich as you want. That's not going to put peace and love into your household. That's all up to you. You need to apply. And so I make the point of fighting with your spouse. I can fight with her and I can win that fight. But guess what? Then I'm married to a loser. So if you lose, you lose. If you win, you lose. So the secret is to just not fight, to rather figure out ways to solve the problem. I apply the same logic here within the company. And Ruan, I remember when you wanted to quit. It's when I was fighting with you. Do you remember that? We had
yes, definitely.
You and I fought a lot. And the penny dropped for me, and I realized, but if I win in the fight against you, then I've employed a loser. And I stopped. So you helped me learn that lesson, by the way.
Amazing.
You're the person who actually helped me learn that lesson, and you stuck through it. You stuck with me and with Xponent, and I think we're both better for it.
Exactly. Yeah, digging through that chasm gives you strength, because look at those big waves. If you have to swim through that, your arms are going to be lacquer. You're going to be strong.
Yes, but it takes time, right? And I had to learn a lot of discipline to come to this realization, and that's the informed optimism of saying there's no point in fighting with the team members unless it's someone who's really trying to bring the company down or purposefully cheating or whatever the case may be. Then it's a different situation. Then we're adversaries, but you've placed yourself in the position of being adversarial. But if you're not in that adversarial position, if you're just trying to do a job and you make a mistake, what's the point of shitting on someone? It's just more energy wasted towards that thing. And I've got a saying, it goes, the more you touch shit, the more it stinks. So just leave it. Move on, find a way to solve the problem and forget what happened. Not forget, obviously we try and learn from our mistakes, but overcome the emotional response and just move towards the solution.
But I think it all depends on where the shit is. If it's on the carpet, you got to deal with it. If it's on the grass, you can forget about it for a while.
Yeah, that doesn't mean you need to touch it more than what's necessary.
Still true, yeah.
Yes, Sasha.
Sorry, Bayesh, if I can just interject. Maybe my previous example wasn't too good, but when you started talking about fighting and, solutions and not doing it, there's a saying that says nobody wins a war. And if I can refer to World War II, you and I had a brief discussion the other day about, the concentration camps. I mean, all of those Jews were lied to. They were uninformed, optimistic that they are going to be with their families and they're going to be in a safe haven. Then they went into the concentration camps, and now they learn, that they were lied to. And they've been in that chasm, as you called it, or the dip, for many, many years. And the book that Viktor Frankl wrote, Man's Search for Meaning, I mean, he said that he could see when people walk back from the jobs they had to do in their eyes that they're not going to survive the night. And then when they were released, then they moved into the more informed optimism because now the war's over. So I think that is a very harsh reality of this illustration that you put down.
Sasha, yes, very good example. I think if you want to apply micro and macro lens to all of this, the individual in the concentration camp was going through a chasm and going into a situation. And I think one of the takeaways that's not obvious from Viktor Frankl's book is actually a quote from Fight Club, where he says, it's only once you have lost everything that you are free to do anything. I think that that's probably one of Chuck Palahniuk's best lines in all of his books. And I've read a lot of Chuck Palahniuk books. The best lines is in Fight Club, where he says, it's only when you've lost everything that you are free to do anything. An example of that is in business books. And say the person who has or who's least interested usually wins the negotiation because they've got nothing to lose. They've got, what do they care? They can walk away at any point. And so that does give you a certain amount of power, but you need to go through the whole idea of losing everything. And I think that's where the chasm comes in. Obviously, that's a bit of a harsh example, but the chasm is really figuring out how to not be dependent on specific factors so that you are free to act. And that's where things start looking easy. To other people, it's like, wow, look at this person. They're just doing so well and it's so easy. Let me go and do what they're doing. Let me copy their idea. And it's fine because they can copy us. That's what I was saying. I can't remember who I was talking to, but I made the point that we're not worried about competitors. I'm not worried about competitors in Xponent. They don't faze me because I know going through the chasm is very difficult. And most people are going to stay in this space if they start marketing companies. Because if you're not very conscious about how you're building your company, how you're putting together your systems, who you're employing, how you're building your team and how you're building your systems, how you're building your company, the clients that you choose to work with, all of these things, you're just going to basically flip between this space. And it's going to be very difficult to get here. Super, super difficult. So I'm not worried about 95% of our competitors. And I think that that's really the takeaway for today is if you can use your emotions like tools in a tool belt, then you have overcome your situation. And that's the example of Viktor Frankl, where he disconnects from reality and starts seeing himself as being dead already. It's when he reaches that point that he becomes a bit more gregarious with the guards. You know, he starts tuning them and not hiding from them. And then they sort of like him and they ask him to start, because he's a medical doctor, I think, right? And he starts treating patients and treating the guards, and they sort of keep him alive for that reason. But it's only when he accepts the fact that he's already dead that he starts living that full life. Yeah, there's something true in that. So I'll close off with one idea, and this is from the Stoic philosophers. The idea is memento mori. Stoic philosophers would make the point that everyone will die. So remember your death every morning. Remember that you are already dead. It's just a matter of time. And so when you start realizing this is my last day and I should treat it like the last day on this planet, what would I do with my time? And that's where you start sort of activating these superpowers and you start performing on a superhuman level. So, okay, with that thought, I'm going to close off the meeting. Thank you all for your attendance. I hope you found this insightful and that you learned something. If you didn't learn something, that you heard something cool and interesting and different. Have a great day and a good week further.